Welcome to Wednesdays with Fortuna, and the third in a masterclass series that we've been running through the month of July, as perhaps many of you are thinking about those applications you're putting together, whether it's for round one in September or round two later on the year, typically in January. Already in the last 2 weeks, and I've been with Fortuna since we started the company 10 years ago. I still learn an extraordinary amount. There's so many insights, tips, guidance from these masterclasses. So we've done sessions already on essays and sharing that personal narrative. Last week, we focused on letters of recommendation. Viewers, you came up with some amazing questions. Like we could have just fed the whole webinar session with the questions that you came up with. And today, the focus is on the MBA resume. And we emphasize it's a resume for your business school applications. That is not to get your job as a grade 3 software engineer and all that that might imply. This is really to share your story, that path of personal and professional growth and development. I've mentioned many times, of course, the tremendous pleasure that I have working with what I describe as Fortuna's dream team. They come from pretty much every top US and international business school. They were the gatekeepers that were actually looking at applications and making decisions to craft the diversity of incoming classes from those top US and European schools. This is perhaps also just an opportunity to remind you of your chance to reach out to Fortuna, whether it's questions on the resume and the application forms or those other pieces of the application puzzle. For the free consultations that we offer, we do take these consultations very seriously. We look through your resumes well ahead of that session, prepare questions so that we can really have an in-depth discussion, and we hope provide great guidance, a very, very useful session for you. For today's session, and given that focus on the resume, one of our experts for resumes, Tuttle. Catherine is a former associate director at Duke, the Fuqua School of Business, and with her, Cassandra Pittman, who herself is the expert in personal storytelling. Cassandra is a Columbia MBA, and she was also a former member of admissions at both the London Business School and INSEAD. So you can see with that level of insight and expertise, we're in for a great session together. Do come in with all of the questions as you go. I mentioned the 2 masterclasses we already held in July, but on the Fortuna website and on our various social media channels, there is an extraordinary wealth of material and resource that we've put together. Some is school specific, others that look at these different themes of that admissions journey. So I hope that you will make the most of that in the next 6-7 weeks ahead of the HBS deadline that gets the dance started for round 1 and the upcoming admissions cycle. Today, as I said, it's all about the resume and the application form. So perhaps big picture, and Catherine, I'll start with you if I may. The role that the resume plays, is this often a place that the admissions office will start just to get a sense of the candidate that they have in front of them?
Yes, yeah. And thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here today. And I love that we have so many people live, so ready for questions as they come. There's kind of 2 main ways that the resume comes into play. One, yes, it does tend to be one of the first things that admissions looks at within your application. And 2, typically it's the only thing that your interviewer will have as it relates to your application. So they're not reading your entire application story. They don't see the entire narrative. So this is really a chance for you to introduce yourself to your interviewer, both professionally and personally. So we'll kind of talk through what is appropriate to share and how to share it on this document.
Now, you have prepared some great materials as we go through today's masterclass, Catherine, that really breaks down and provides so many tips of how you could structure, but it's typically 1 page. And I mentioned earlier, this is not necessarily the resume that you would have sent for a job application. Now, why is that?
Well, this really is to highlight, we're in this case, if we're not applying for a job we're not looking at buzzwords and keywords and trying to get all of those things in order to, make it through the online system. It does need to be a page, and it needs to really focus on your accomplishments and how you've added value to the organization. Some things like summary, at the top, or kind of these technical skills that we might highlight for an engineering role aren't necessary. And then some things that we might not include on a professional resume, like things that you did in undergrad that, showcase your interests and your personality, or, things that you do in your spare time, your outside interests or your volunteer work. Those need to be, built out in a way that they wouldn't for a job application.
Right. With all of the Center Court MBA festival events that I host with the admissions directors of the top schools, I often ask them, where do you start on the resume? Is that education or the professional experience, or what about all that fun stuff down at the bottom that talks about a love of Amy's ice cream in Austin, Texas? Why not? What do you think? Do you think a lot of admissions officers do take a peek at those other areas of interest and accomplishments that you have first?
Oh, yes, I think so. I mean, I think we're always going to scan through and, start by, like, oh, okay, they work for, Deutsche Bank or, McKinsey. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, they've been there a few years. But I think the fun part that we're all kind of naturally drawn to are those interests and your involvement when you were in undergrad, and also that volunteer work. I know, coming from Fuqua, that's such a huge part of what they're looking for, is people who are engaged within the community and have a cause that is greater than themselves. And so I think we would naturally kind of lean towards that in the beginning.
Right. Cassandra, probably if you ask many applicants, well, what do you think might be involved in the whole admissions process? And they'll quickly talk about essays, assuming that they're going to provide the resume and the voices that come from letters of recommendation. But the application form, very few speak about it, and yet it can be such a crucial part of this process. And you know how every word counts. Just perhaps, again, provide some context and how it's being used in the wider role of the admissions office.
So I think it's a huge trap and an easy one to fall into, to think that any individual part of an MBA application is not important or is less important than another. There are some parts of a process that will take more time to complete, but there is no part that is less important than another part. And so I kind of want to just set by framing. For example, we are zooming in here on application forms and resumes, but it's also important to zoom out and say, we are building a narrative for you, and everything we do, every single piece of your application, from your recommendations to your essays, to your application form, to your resume, to your interviews, every interaction you have with the school, every time you send an email, has to be in service and supporting that narrative. So, question on the slide here is, how important is the application form? And my answer is very important as anything else.
They might ask for salary, something that wouldn't typically appear on your resume. They will ask about your parents, maybe their professional backgrounds. Are you the first one in your family to go to college?
Okay.
Talk us through some of those different components and how it's setting the scene and the information it's then providing to the admissions office.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is, there's a lot of things that differ from application form to application form, although some things that are the same. And what is the same is that most of the schools are looking for broadly the same information, but they ask for it in different ways. So you mentioned some of the questions that you get, for example, around your career, around salary progression, any bonuses you've had. There's also usually a space to talk a little bit more in depth about giving your job description role, which is, we're going to come on to this later, but one of the reasons that you don't need to describe what you do in your job on your resume, because there's another portion. Some schools will ask that in an essay, but some will ask it on the application form as a question. They also usually on the application forms will be asking you to go deeper into what sorts of things you've committed to in your volunteer life or your interests in sports or et cetera. And I really want to encourage applicants to think about all of those questions as mini essays. So, for example, Harvard does not have a question around what you want to do post-graduation as one of the essays, but they do have it in their application form. It is very word limited. You don't have a lot of space. So you have to craft that, and every word, every letter has to work for you. But I want you to think about that. I want the applicants to think about that as a mini essay and how it fits into that whole narrative. So it's almost your application form. You can almost think of it as a catch-all for everything else about you and your profile and your life and your candidacy that isn't covered in depth in an essay or a resume or in your letters of recommendation.
Right. The fact that they might ask about awards, publications, maybe there's a patent that you have to your name.
If only I would be retired by now, Matt.
What does that indicate about how the schools, sometimes will just, one small detail can then resonate with them or imply, if he or she went to those steps to, patent their work. But what are the sort of the devil in the details with those sort of questions?
So I want to be cautious about how I answer this question, Matt, because what I see a lot with applicants I work with is they say, but I don't have a patent to my name. I've never won an award. Does that mean I'm not going to have a shot? And the answer, of course, is no. People get in all the time that haven't won awards or won a Nobel Prize. But what I would say is this: virtually everybody, not every single person, but virtually everybody who applies to business school has an acceptable GMAT, good undergrad, good work experience. So our job in crafting an application is about helping the school know what differentiates you amongst that already very competitive pool. And you want to use every opportunity you have to help the admissions committee understand that. And I think that's why schools have all of these many questions, not because you have to have had an award or, published a book or anything like that, but because if you have, that's going to be a differentiating factor. So whether it's through your awards or through your volunteer work or through your, sports competitions, or indeed you've published a book or, whatever it might be, it's about giving you the space to tell that story, and you want to leverage that space to tell that story as well.
Got it. Right. So it's their form, it's their structure. And we've all seen very colorful, design-focused resumes. But the fundamental of showcasing your professional experience in this one page, maybe Catherine, just why there are individuals that probably could run to 2 or 3 pages on a resume. Why are we already trying to capture the essence of that professional background, academics, other areas of interest, community engagement in just one page?
And part of that is already kind of preparing you for recruiting once you get into the program. And you will be required to have a one-page resume for the resume book that is accessed online by employers. So part of that is already getting you to think through, what are the most important parts of my story, professionally and personally, that will resonate with, a particular audience, or, with, that align with your career goals. And so part of that is really just us getting you ready and starting to think through that and what's important in your story. There are lots of fun templates these days and design-focused resumes. But the fact of the matter is, if they don't give you a template, which some schools will say, use this particular template, you will have to get it into a fairly standard template almost immediately once you get on campus. So we want to really condense things down to, what do I need to know versus what's nice to know.
Right. Okay. So we've prepared some different examples. We're going to start with professional experience. And Catherine, I think, here we have an individual that in the last 3 years been working at a firm in New York, and then we've got the job title, 3 bullet points perhaps to reflect those 3 years. Now,
Right.
talk about what you've seen there and how you've then looked to restructure and create perhaps a different pathway.
Yeah. So in this case, somebody, a client came in and, this was their current role, and they have been at the company since 2019, and they had multiple bullets. So this is a small snapshot of the bullets that were on that resume. So it was a very lengthy section that is hard to get through when we're really wanting to highlight the accomplishments. So, come to find out when we start working together, she was promoted very quickly within the organization ahead of schedule. And so, we want to highlight that progression, and we want to highlight the things that make you stand out. Breaking things up, one, makes it easier to digest. It's easier to digest 3 or 4 bullets under a job title than 8, all together. But we also want to show what separates you from your peers. If you are promoted ahead of schedule, or in this case, the first associate ever to receive a double promotion, I want to know that, because that's, more than just I add value, in my job in these projects. I think what we want to do also is think about building within these sections, right? When you get a promotion, there are going to be things that you still have to do, right? You're still going to have to run these Excel sheets or, present to leadership or whatnot, but I don't need to see that over and over again. Like, I understand those things will come along. This is your opportunity to really highlight the projects that you've been able to do, show that growth and progression within the organization, and really introduce yourself and what makes you stand out.
In terms of action verbs, Cassandra, and here we've got some spearheaded, co-authored, collaborated. So it's not, I'd love to have a bullet point that said that I single-handedly revolutionized the business education industry, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. What is your take on that sort of active ownership, and also the very interesting contrast of collaboration, and how these introductory words to a bullet point can then set the scene for what they're describing?
Yeah, I think that I want to highlight 2 things you said there that I think are really important. So one is, of course, leading with a compelling action verb that shows the unique impact and value that you had. So, get your personal pronouns out of there. Use every single space that you possibly can to communicate that impact and that value. But the second thing that I really want to double down on is that you highlighted, but you have this collaboration, okay? Because there's a delicate balance that you have to play when you're applying to business school, in that you want to show that you are a leader who really drives impact in all you do. And you also critically must show that you can work well in a team of other people, that you have the humility to take on other people's ideas and to be part of a team who's working towards something. Now, that seems relatively simple. I say that and most people go, yeah, I get it. But actually, it is an art to balance those things in the limited space you have in an application. And what I love about this example in the after here is that it does that so well. You have some really good call outs confidently. Look, I was promoted, very quickly, first ever in the company to achieve it this way. I've got some analysis here, spearheaded, co-authored, and then beautifully, the last 2 are about collaborating with somebody else. So the balance is about right. It's about 1/3, 2/3. And that's what you kind of want to go for here.
Right. You're both extraordinary coaches and have this track record of bringing the best out of people. Cassandra, if we look at sort of 2 extremes of those, can you quickly identify when someone perhaps is overstretching and giving themselves too much of the achievement, but equally, you've been a cheerleader for someone saying, no, that really was, your impact, and making sure that they have ownership and are quite assertive about the role that they played?
Yeah, and this is why I say it's an art. It's more art than science, because you read a resume, you read somebody's essay, and I can't always tell you exactly why, but I can tell you I read something and the voice comes across as arrogant rather than confident. And so there's an art form to subtly changing those words, subtly bringing in more of the collaboration, more of those words that point to you working as a team. And then absolutely, you're 100% right on the other end of the spectrum. And as you know, Matt, I'm super passionate about promoting more women to leadership roles. And so I like to work with a lot of women who are applying to business school. And unfortunately, not always, but unfortunately, what I see in a lot of women is the opposite. They say, oh, I don't want to come across as too arrogant. I didn't just do this myself. And with them, it's much more about coaching them to say, you did impact things. The team would not have been the same if you were not in it. How would the result not have gotten there? Or maybe you got help to get there more quickly. Maybe you did it more collaboratively. Maybe you were the glue that helped this team stay together. And how do we tell that story? And that is one of the advantages of working with somebody is they can help draw that out of you.
Right. With some of the questions that are coming in now, many of the viewers are putting the questions in the chat. Forgive me, viewers, if you can post these questions in the Q&A, simply because then when we cover them, I get to click that little box to say we're done. Otherwise, I might get lost, and I apologize for that. But Shivani asks a great question, Catherine, which I think speaks to this slide, the importance of showing a promotion in a firm. Some firms, it takes 4 or 5 years in a very hierarchical organization. Others are very flat. Not all reward with promotions. They find other ways of rewarding. So what's your take on job titles and how promotions can be useful, but perhaps not essential?
Yeah. And I think that we kind of touch on this a little bit later, but in general, members of the admissions committee understand how the structure works, what certain jobs are, what people do in those roles, and how those firms, promote people. There is based on, the thousands and thousands of applications that they've read and resumes that they've read. There's a way perhaps to explain that in an optional essay quickly if you're worried that there may be a perception that you're not that a lack of promotion is a negative thing. But I think it's not, if you haven't been promoted, that doesn't mean, that you're not going to get in. So I think what we need to really focus on is taking ownership of what you've done that has had a positive impact on the company. What actions have you taken on, and what was the result of those? And to Cassandra's point, this balance of taking ownership and then also weaving in this collaborative nature and being able to work with people. I think the other piece of it too is, if it is a relatively flat structure, highlighting things, if you are reporting to the CEO, or if you are, presenting to the board of directors or whatnot, like highlighting that exposure to leadership and any opportunities that you have had to lead, whether that's formally or informally.
Right. So that job description and the packing down, Cassandra has already emphasized that every word counts, but sometimes there are simply too many. Catherine, I'm going to have you talk through this and then bring in a question from one of our dear friends that's been following Fortuna for many months now. The idea that sometimes less is more. It's always a nice idea. How do we put that into implication? But Catherine, why did you pull out your scissors on this one and remove that second bullet point?
Yeah. So I mean, this, if you're coming in general, the AgComs know what people are doing on a day-to-day basis. If you are, whether you are in finance, marketing, operations, the technical side, they know what you're doing. They've read those applications. The resume really isn't about listing everything you've ever done. It's listing what you have done that has added value and that is showcasing a skill set that will be valuable within the program, whether that is a hard skill, I can run detailed Excel models and pivot tables and analyze data, or whether that's a soft skill, I can coach and mentor people outside of my, typical day-to-day job. I can collaborate across departments. I can take on tasks that are outside of the typical day-to-day of an analyst or whatnot. So and again, to Cassandra's point, this will be elsewhere in the application. You can include the day-to-day in the actual online application where they ask you, where they ask, company name, job title, job description, blah, blah, blah. There is a space for that. And that is not a space where you would copy and paste your resume. They already have that. So don't use that space to copy your accomplishments. Give them the overview. Who do you report to? What are your daily tasks? And, who's reporting to you? That type of thing.
Cassandra, I'm applying to my dream school. I want to tell them everything about me, and yet I've only got one page. If I use font size 6 and I remove my personal address because they've got that somewhere else in the application form, how can I pack everything in? At some point, I'm sure we're back to your framing it as a delicate balance and an art form. What are your thoughts in terms of stuffing this resume, perhaps having too many internships when we could be focusing on the early years of your career after coming out of college?
Mm-hmm. Please never use 6-point font. That's where I'm going to start. 10 is in my opinion your minimum. There are some people that will say 9, but let me tell you, I have met many an admissions director who is pushing middle age, and it is never nice to be reminded that you are old and need to put on your reading glasses. Okay, so just get everything you can working for you and use a decent font size. Less really is more in a lot of cases. So I want to use a concrete example to kind of drive this home. Okay, so I'm working with a client right now who is a TV producer and who has a degree in journalism and has never taken a quantitative course in her life, and is hoping to get a good score on the GRE to help boost that. But a lot of our narrative for her is about making sure the AdCom knows that she can think analytically and quantitatively, and having the confidence to know that she can cope with the academic rigor of those quant courses when she's in her MBA program. It's not the overall narrative, but we know we need to hit that bucket. So the initial, drafts of her resume were around, all that she's done, right? Because she was thinking, they're not going to understand what a TV producer's job is. I need to tell this story. Number one, they probably have seen TV producers. I mean, let's give them a bit of credit. These schools receive thousands of applications every single year. Most people have been doing it for years and years. They've seen pretty much everything. Number two, there's another place to tell that, as you've just reminded everybody, Catherine. And number three, the resume is a marketing document. So what did I want to do in that resume? And I think we're going to come on to this in the next slide, but is I wanted to use as many numbers as possible. Now, for her, she said, but I can't share impact numbers. This stuff is private. I don't even know a lot. You'd be surprised, right? Like I don't have an exposure to the business, but it was about bringing in as many numbers as possible. So when that first skim that the admissions member reads through, because they're going to skim it before they read it, the feeling they're getting is, oh, this person uses a lot of numbers. It might even be a subconscious thing, but they start to think this person is a quantitatively oriented TV producer. So we didn't need 5 million bullets to talk about every segment she's ever produced and everything she does. What we needed to do is say, what's the most impactful story, and where can we what things can we quantify? And from that, we had the edit we were going with.
Got it. We're getting so many good questions. I said at the beginning of this webinar, I'm still learning from my colleagues after 10 years at Fortuna. I think that this webinar is going to be, if we get through even half of those questions, that there are things that I've never considered. So keep them coming in. We will have a session at the end, and in the spirit of TV producers, it'll be like one of those quick fire quiz shows. And I'm going to ask Catherine and Cassandra to nail answers in about 30 seconds for each one. But Cassandra did introduce this idea of numbers. I suppose perhaps before we get there, you're talking here, Catherine, about showing value. Now, I look at that first bullet point, which says what's on the label. Where have you taken this to really then demonstrate to the admissions office the impact that the individual has brought.
Yeah, and I will do that. I will quickly, to Cassandra's point about the TV producer. I had an opera singer client last year, and she had the same thing. Well, they don't know, opera singers don't apply to business school. Let me tell you, we found an opera singer, either current or alum, at all of the top 10 schools. And so it really, I mean, they have seen everything. There are ways you really don't have to over explain. But in this case, yes, I mean, this is what my former colleague at Fuqua would call a so what bullet, right? So if I read this and I say, so what? There's not enough information. You're telling me what you did, but you're not telling me how you added value. And so this is a case where, you know, we look at, okay, that was the action that you did, but how do we build that out? How do we put context around that and numbers to that, to Cassandra's point? So perform cost analysis for 5 Fortune 500 companies in the IT industry. Okay, so we're building that out. It was 5 companies. These are big organizations, and saving them an average of $300,000 per year, which generated 20 million in follow-up business for the firm. So this is not just the action, it's the action and the result of that action. And that is what we want you to think about when you're writing bullets. It is okay for them to go to 2 lines. You know, I don't want 3 or 4 for one bullet, but I always tell clients, you know, start out going over a page. Like, don't censor yourself trying to get everything onto the page. Tell me everything you've ever done, right? Like that, well, not everything you've ever done. Tell me about the projects that you've done that have added value. Be wordy. We can get that down, but don't censor yourself trying to get all of this to a page on the first go round. And yes, don't go smaller than 10-point font.
So viewers, we have our acid test. When you've completed the bullet point, ask yourselves, so what?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't sound the best, that bullet point doesn't stick. I mean, just as a rule of thumb, Cassandra, perhaps someone that has, 4, 5, 6 years of professional experience, maybe they've worked in 2 organizations. Now, let's say they worked in 3 organizations in that 5-year period. If we had 7 bullet points for the most recent 2 years and only 1 for the subsequent roles, I mean, should there be some sort of thoughtful distribution so that there doesn't appear to be an imbalance between roles 1, 2, and 3?
I would actually argue that it shouldn't be balanced, right? The most recent thing you've done usually should take up the most space,
Right.
Because, let's be honest, we've all been young once. We know what those early jobs were like. You don't have a lot of impact. Like, let's just be honest. Most of us did not have a lot of impact in the first couple of years in our career. So if you have, great. If you only have 2 years, you're going to have all that space to tell. But if not, probably you're having more impact now, and you need to be impact driven rather than, description driven. Also, we're zooming in here on the resume, but let's zoom out a little bit and remember that the resume and the application form work hand in hand. So you will have space on your resume to tell a more in-depth story about every single job you've had. Your resume, your 1-page resume, is a marketing exercise. That's what it is. So most impactful thing first. Fine if your first position only has 1 or 2 bullets and your most recent position has a lot more, is what I would say.
And a follow-up from a viewer's question, perhaps not considering those that are applying to HBS 2+2 or deferred enrollment to Stanford, so those college seniors where obviously they haven't yet begun at the early stages of their career. But one of the viewers is saying they've got 3 years of work experience. So Cassandra, does it make sense to include internships from undergrad?
I mean, there's no hard and fast rule on this, but I would say potentially yes, if you can point to something that really had an impact. So if you worked somewhere for 2 weeks and it was more of a discovery, and you didn't really have a project that you contributed to or owned, it doesn't belong there. if you had, as you know, Matt, I work a lot with European applicants who part of their whole education model is they take a gap year between their penultimate and their final year of graduation, and they have a year-long, either 1 year-long internship or 2 6-month internships. Well, they really have something meaty there to talk about what they've done. That would definitely go there. So I know it's really frustrating because in these kind of webinars, people want a hard and fast answer and they hate it depends. So I'll go a little deeper than it depends, but I would say, can you point to an impact you had in that time? If the answer is yes, then it potentially deserves a space on your resume. If the answer is no, it was more about you discovering, probably not.
And I'm going to remind everyone of the free consultations. These are the sort of things that can be discussed, this level of granular detail and how it comes across. The team that you'll initially be talking to is drawing on Cassandra's experience. They're drawing on Catherine's experience. They're drawing on the experience of 40 individuals that collectively must have, I don't know, a big number, 300, 400 years worth of admissions and careers experience. So, we'll be able to go through all of these different issues and keep those great questions coming. Now, numbers. Even if you are an opera singer, and I know how excited that M7 school is to welcome that opera singer next month.
Yes.
Why are we quantifying things, Catherine?
Because we want to show the impact and the scope of the role. I think sometimes people, when we say quantify, clients are often like, well, I'm not in finance, or, I'm an opera singer, how can I quantify things, right? And so what I would say is it's not always a number that connects to the bottom line, right? So, in this case, completed interviews with senior and mid-management of corporations, synthesizing findings. Okay, so how do we provide scope around that? Okay, it's over 200 at the senior and mid-management executive level of these large corporations. And then I drafted those papers and, distributed that to 1,000 clients, right? So this isn't, that generated $100 million in revenue, but this is showing the scope of where this information is being transmitted. And I would imagine, that have to be a pretty darn good white paper to go to clients, to 1,000 clients. So, where you can, yes, a project worth $400,000 a year, covering 30 higher education institutions, yes, that has a number attached to it, but it's not just the 400,000, it's where did that go? So really thinking about not just the result. I mean, it's great if we can link it to you saving, time, right? So I created this process that allowed us to do this thing in a day versus, a week. Or, I completed this project that generated $500,000 in revenue and those types of things, but it's not always going to be a number as it relates to the bottom line of the business, and that's okay.
Right. Cassandra, back to your TV producer and the fact that for some of the inquiry consultations that I've had, I've been contacted beforehand by MI6, by the CIA, by the Pentagon, wanting to know who I was and why I was talking to one of their staff members and how discreet this conversation might be. Some of them were placing briefing documents on the desk of the Oval Office, just to give people a sense. In terms of disclosure, one of our viewers has said, working in consulting, should you disclose the clients that you work with, or perhaps some of the numbers on these big projects? Now, in this individual's, the engagements are public information, but would committees ever think that you were breaking client confidentiality? So I suppose with all of that, again, where do you draw the line in providing helpful numbers and detail without appearing to share too much?
Yeah. So I think number one, if you're working, never break confidentiality agreement. Let's start there. And if you're working in a field that you have some public information, draw on that public information as much as you can. So let me give you an example of the TV producer. Lots of the internal ratings, percent growth, things like that. If it's not public, it's not out. They don't want anyone sharing it. Okay. And it's not like we can hide what show she's working on. So it's a little bit different than a consulting client. But what is public is the number of, for example, YouTube followers that the show has, or certain clips and certain segments, how many viewers that's garnered on TikTok, etc. And for her story, the narrative, the career narrative is she's in traditional TV production now. She wants to move to media tech. So those examples, anybody could search on Google and see, Google or YouTube or, Facebook, and see that validate what she's saying. And those are the kinds of quantifications that we have drawn upon in her resume. The other thing I would say for consulting specifically, the number of people who apply to business school from consulting are many. I actually don't think it benefits you in any way to name the company, because you can describe the company in very little words, right? It's a Fortune 50 oil company or something like that. And then it's completely anonymized, but it anchors the reader to say, oh, it's this kind of company. He has deep expertise in oil and gas, or deep expertise in media, whatever it might be. And so you can do that fairly easily. And it shouldn't be too much of a problem.
In the book club that I started last year, I increased membership by 200%. I had one 9-year-old, and now I've got 3. But that would be a 200% increase. Catherine, any word about percentages? Rodrigo was asking, because they can hide perhaps realities behind the numbers.
Mm-hmm. I do think that we want to highlight things in the best way possible. And in some cases, people worry that this project, it was 200,000, which is, yes, a lot of money, but in my field, other people are working on projects that are 1 million, right? And so we want to show things that highlight your work in the best way. So maybe it's not about the size of the project, but the percentage increase of profit that project generated. Sometimes percentages can be a good way to show a result while negating a concern around numbers looking smaller than they would appear otherwise. But obviously we don't want to lie about anything or hide the truth. Anything you put on that resume, you have to be able to speak to in the interview. So, there is a balance and an art to that. And that's a lot of how, we work on the resume with clients, is let's talk about this and how to showcase it in the best way possible.
And presumably, Cassandra, numbers specific to your industry. Ria is an architect and will need to maybe contextualize some of her work. It won't be the same as some of the bankers, software engineers, and consultants applying to business school. She asks, she works with square feet, I guess, for, in this case, a significant IT campus that she's been involved with. That's a good number to share, right? Whether it's square feet or dollars.
I think a couple things I just want to say. I want to answer this question, and I want to loop back just to add a little bit to what Catherine just said on the other one. But, again, let's go back to your resume is going to be skimmed before it's read. So the fact that you have numbers, like physical numerals, as opposed to alphabets, like letters, and that's good, because the person's going to skim and they're going to get the feeling this person is somebody who knows how to quantify. This is somebody who knows how to speak in numbers. That is a good thing. If the measure by which you can tell the importance of a project is in square feet, because you are an architect, absolutely go with that. You're not a banker, you're an architect. It's about how do you quantify in your field. If I can jump in on the question you asked just before about, can you obscure with percentages, et cetera. this is true in a resume. It's true in essays, and just in general of how you present yourself to a business school. This is not your diary. You're not talking to your psychologist. This is about you marketing yourself in the very best way that you can. And as Catherine rightly said, that we have to remember everything has to be truthful, but it doesn't have to be the whole truth. And I think that's something that is really important to discern here. Our job is to present what you've done in the very best light it can possibly be presented. And sometimes that is through a 200% increase when you've gone from one person to three. And sometimes it's about a square footage. So don't feel that you are being misleading by doing that. There's nothing unethical about doing that. That's what we have to do to help the committee understand the impact that you can bring.
Right. I'm going to acknowledge right now the limitation of Zoom. I wish that we're all in this room, cocktails served at the end. Cassandra, that's a promise, just so that we could sit with this incredible group and the questions that they're asking. I'm going to keep moving because obviously Catherine and Cassandra, in preparing this masterclass, really wanted to share and break down some of these different details. We're back to that word impact, Catherine. Stanford must use it 1,000,000 times in any of the info sessions they ever give. Talk us through, you no more than two lines on a bullet point, but what's made the difference between the first examples of high-value data visualizations and affecting price analysis to what now emerges in the impact model?
Yeah, so in this case, again, it's additional scope. So it's not just creating these data visualizations for C-suite clients. We're talking about a specific geospatial data-driven visual dashboard for First National Bank, that is the client. So rather than saying at a high level, this is what I do on a daily basis, like we were saying, this is a specific example that shows impact, increasing visibility to all 600 plus branches by 80%. Similarly, developed and maintain pricing analysis data models. This specific example of a large consumer survey to help a media company with 1.2 billion. So we're quantifying, again, putting those numbers in there to determine its pricing elasticity across multiple segments, which projected revenue estimated at X. So that is a question that we do get a lot. I don't have the result of this yet, right? So this is a project I'm working on. I think it's important, but I don't know what it will generate. Well, it's okay to estimate, to get approval for this project. I'm guessing you had to convince someone it was important. So what is it expected to generate? And, I think, again, getting to that numbers piece, we want to include those, but we can't always attach a number. So if there isn't a number attached to that, think about what the goal of that was, right? Is it going to, improve the employee satisfaction or increase engagement among different teams? Like, there's ways to show results that are important without attaching a number to it. One thing I would say here too, to Cassandra's point about consultants, and there are a lot of you who apply to business school, it is important to think about what is most important. So oftentimes having a selected project section is a great way for you to think about, what are the projects that I've worked on that showcase the most important skills, and, not having to list everything you've ever done, because that would be a 3-page resume. Right. And consultants have that resume that they send out to clients. That is not a business school resume. So really thinking through the impact and highlighting, specific projects versus general. And they will understand it's not every project you've ever done, and that's okay.
Now, with that point, Catherine, I'm going to come back to Cassandra, something that you said at the beginning of the masterclass. each component of the application, its importance, the role that it plays, it's there for a reason. And Stanish is asking about perhaps tying together resume. We could equally put in there the letters of recommendation, of course, and voices that might be providing more color and detail about these bullet points. But the essays, if I had developed a geospatial data-driven visual dashboard, I might be quite proud of myself and want to share that in an essay. Can bullet points sometimes be a teaser for something that comes next? Or is it, they now know this about me, and when Harvard says, what more should we know? I should be looking elsewhere and using the freedom to share a more personal narrative.
In the vast majority of cases, it is going to be the latter. So it's not that business schools are not interested in what you've done. In fact, let's take your example of Harvard. I mean, Harvard wants to see what they call a habit of leadership, right? So they do want to understand, what have you done up to this point? And all business schools do. Most questions, most business schools' essay questions are future focused. Okay, so HBS, a little bit of a notable example because it's so open-ended, you can write about anything, right? But let's take, for example, Columbia's first essay. I love their first essay question because they say it directly. Through your resume and your recommendations, and I don't think they say the application form, but that's also part of it. We have an understanding of what you've done in the past. Tell us about what you want to do after, from this Columbia MBA. And the essays are usually more about telling that story. Now, it depends on the question that you're asked, obviously. Yale asks, for example, what's the biggest commitment you've ever made? So there might be something that you've teased out in your resume that you can go deeper into the essay, if it makes sense. But just please don't repeat. Right? You have just such a limited space to tell the story of who you are and what your dreams are and what impact you want to have in the world and can have in the world. You have to use every single character count in a way that adds to that story and tells a more complete story. So repeating is just never going to enhance your candidacy.
Right. Okay, so it's not repetition, although I do have 2 apostrophes in the title of this one. That's on me. Show and don't tell your skills. Here's Python. I've seen that one before. SQL, VBA. I'm still not quite sure what those technical skills will get me. Again, Catherine, you've taken us in a different direction with these skills.
Yes, and I know we're getting towards the end and we want to get all the content. So in this point, don't leave things on the resume that, aren't backed up, right? So if you say I demonstrated strong technical skills, well, in your opinion, or, in your boss's opinion, like that doesn't add a lot of value. It's kind of like a so what bullet point. So, show me how those things added value. Again, we're getting to the impact, we're getting to the result, we're getting to the why behind the bullet point.
Right. I just want to mention to both of you, how many of the people writing in with questions or just writing in to say thank you. Thank you for how much they're enjoying a great webinar. And I think we might run over by just a few minutes. I hope that's okay. But it just feels that you're both sharing so much. We haven't even touched on the academic background. Perhaps let's jump in here. Cassandra, can I turn to you on this one? Because, we spent those 3 or 4 years of our undergraduate lives and we got an award in CSR. And yet in the slide that Catherine's prepared for us, now we have international travel. Is this, again, an overlooked opportunity? Because there were so many things involved in those undergraduate years.
Yeah, so I think you alluded to this when we first started Catherine did when we first started to say there are things on your MBA resume that you probably wouldn't include on a job resume. And one of them is, potentially that all the way back at university, you were on the lacrosse team. Those just the kind of things you want to include on your 1-page marketing document that is your resume. Why? Because schools are looking for people who are going to join the class and really engage and contribute to the community, both inside the classroom, but also outside the classroom. And so showing that you have already done that in the other educational opportunity that you had, the other educational environment, is the best way for them to see you are likely to do that here too. So hopefully you have been engaged. You don't necessarily need to have won a senior thesis award, but hopefully you've been a member of a club or led an initiative or done something in that experience at Work Hard University in Boston, and you can tell that story in your resume.
Great. Okay, extracurriculars, the fun stuff down at the bottom where I must admit I often start. Catherine, perhaps there's a key point that you're making here of what to include. Also what's useful, because I could list cooking, reading, hiking. I'm not quite sure what the school would then learn about me. So take us through the sort of things that we might be looking to share. And again, how it's building habits of leadership and other patterns and passions.
Yeah, I think, people often ask, like, what do I include and how much? And I think it often, unfortunately, depends on the level of involvement that you have and the amount of space based on years of experience and all of these things. But we do want to at least highlight the community engagement that you have. When we have space, it's incredibly beneficial to actually add a bullet under that and provide some context in terms of what you are doing in those roles. And I would say keep it to the last few years. If this is, I don't need to know what you did, 10 years ago necessarily. I want to know what you're currently doing and why it's important to you, right? And part of that will be woven in throughout the online application. You also have this section to, it seems repetitive, but build on what's in the resume. And the other piece would be, try not to be generic. Everybody's going to say, I love to travel and I am a foodie and I like cooking, or I've run marathons. Like, everybody's going to have something like that. It's kind of like that 25 random things question, where it's like, don't just tell me you ran a marathon, tell me why you ran a marathon. Right? Tell me why it's important to you. So in this case, talking about not just traveling, but I've visited all 50 states and been to 10 countries. If you have a goal to visit 5 more in the next year, add that in. If you are a foodie, but particularly love food trucks, it's okay to be a little kitschy and say food truck connoisseur. Just, again, to give me a sense of your personality and not just list out a bunch of random, things that everyone else will have. This isn't a place to list programming languages and technical skills. This is a place to show leadership and to show honors and awards and engagement that's important to you.
Right. Cassandra, I may have improved margins. I could have reduced costs, not forgetting that geospatial dashboard that I worked on. As we tie the resume to maybe the interview, or even as the admissions officer is just reading this, I don't know if that they want to meet me because of the margins that I generated, but can there be stuff here? It's like, wow, I'd love to ask them about that and sort of tease their interest.
Absolutely. So let me tell you a story about my own experience. Under the additional information section, I had champagne enthusiast as one of my interests. And, it was a question. The guy said, so champagne enthusiast, tell me about that. And I was able to say, listen, you've probably heard a lot of the box name champagnes. Have you ever tried Gabiarifi? And no, I haven't. Tell me about it. Well, I visited the vineyard in France. It's incredible, owned by this family, et cetera. And it was a whole story. And let me tell you something. That's a lot more interesting than anything I've done in my work life, right? I'm sure that was a more enjoyable conversation to have. And at the end of the day, yes, the interviewers, usually alumni interviewers, not at every school, but a lot, they're gatekeepers. They want to make sure you meet a certain bar, but they're also thinking, do I like this person? Would I want to, have this person at one of the events that I attend, et cetera? Would I have liked them in my classroom or in my learning team? And so if you can have that kind of fun connection, that can often be the difference between a accept and a must accept.
what Cassandra isn't telling us, viewers, is that she has this wonderful way of bringing fun to any project, work or otherwise, that she does. You must listen to the podcast that she started interviewing fantastic female leaders. It's that same enthusiasm and how it translates. It spills beyond a resume. The pitfalls. There were bound to be some. Catherine, is there a pitfall that you feel for the resume that you see? Yeah, avoid that one.
The biggest one is what we've been talking about, like simply listing job descriptions and staying high level versus focusing on the value add. And to Cassandra's point, I will say the second thing will be, and it isn't always women, but wanting to downplay your specific involvement out of a fear that you are being somehow untruthful. It's really important for people to take ownership of what they did and how they added value within a group. It's the same in interviewing. We used to always tell people, stop saying we. Like, we know that this was part of a group. What did you do? And that's where I would say people tend to mess up.
What would you add to that, Cassandra?
We've already said it, but as again, I want to just take a little bit of a zoom out and remember that the application form and the resume, more than anything else, work really as a pair. So don't repeat. I have seen first drafts where people, so let's take London Business School's application form, for example. So, they have the resume, and they also have a question about career, and their kind of job summary is very open-ended. And what a lot of people have done have literally cut and pasted what is on the resume into that section. Don't do that. Use every single character count, as I said before, to help tell a different part of the story or to go deeper and really give that perspective. I know we said it before. I think we said it more than once, but it bears repeating here now because it's something I see so often.
Got it. So I promise just a quick fire. I want to be respectful of your time, but the questions are really good that have been coming in today. Ojachide writes in, the best way to present a resume that shows a lot of job changes. We've looked at perhaps an individual that was in one firm for 3 years. Perhaps, Catherine, there's been a mosaic of different employers. Any thoughts about that?
I hate to say that, and this is where a one-on-one consultation would be really, really helpful, because I think it does depend. I know there was also a question somewhere, and I'm trying to type some answers too when I'm not talking, but there was a question about only being somewhere for 1 or 2 months. Sometimes it's good to just take some of these things out if they're distracting from the bigger picture, from the narrative, and or if they are things that you do not want to talk about in an interview. So if you were somewhere 3 months and it was a horrible experience and it was a culture clash, leave it off, because you're going to have a hard time talking about that in a way that stays positive. So again, I think we'd really want to understand what the story is you're trying to tell and the most effective way to share.
Right. And Cassandra, one of the viewers, the startup that they were working with shut down completely last week. How should they present that on their resume? Or perhaps, a wider industry, and, the company has been wound down.
Well, first of all, I'm really sorry that happened, and I hope that you are already onto your next challenge. The second is that is not uncommon in the world of startups, and hopefully you will have something that you've gone on to. And I think you can talk about how a business exited, and talk about how you've learned from that. Whether that be your own business that wasn't a success, or because you were working for somebody else's. You'd be surprised at how much, particularly in the startup / entrepreneurial space, you can learn from your failures and how much that resonates with the committee.
Right.
And I will say these days, that is, again, I'm sorry it happened. I know it's not ideal, especially when you're preparing, but this is something they've seen, whether it's, the financial crisis in 2019, or, just the rise of startups as major employers for people. It's something you can address quickly within an optional essay as well, if you're worried about the
Right.
perception.
Right. Catherine, you know that the work involved for those 25 random things about you for the Duke essay versus perhaps how you're going to contribute to the Wharton community, both of those require very personal answers for that school. Is there an element where you're tailoring your resume to each school?
I would say in most cases, no. One resume is going to work. Again, it's an introduction. It's a marketing tool. We would work with you on exactly what to include and in how much detail and what to elaborate on in a 25 random things, or what to elaborate on and how you'll add value within the community. But no, you should have one resume that highlights your professional accomplishments, your education and the involvement that you had on campus, your community engagement and additional information, and that should translate across all of the schools.
Now, my final question for you, Cassandra, it's not an easy one, but you would expect no less. We all have different stories, and a resume with a template that might start with work experience, and we expect there to be 3, 4, 5 years of that, and then undergrad, maybe there's a master's degree, but perhaps someone has had far more impact in the community, in their volunteer work. They've done this alongside their work. So with everything that we've shared today, how you might then balance a resume where this major impact that took years involves many bullet points to capture all of it. Is it okay to give it that weight because it is so fundamental to who you are and what you've achieved?
Absolutely.
And with that, viewers, we've said all that we needed to say. There were a handful of other questions that we didn't get to, but already I think we've been blessed with just so much insight and practical tips that all of you, whether it's that bullet point where you're saying, so what? But I think, I might need to watch this session again on our YouTube channel. It will be live as of tomorrow because I picked up so much, and I hope I can bring that into some of the calls that I will be having with you in the weeks ahead as you think about your own business school plans. So it remains for me to thank Catherine, Cassandra, for bringing so much energy, so many great ideas, and being so forthright about it. I think for candidates, every situation is different, but you brought so much clarity to what you shared. Viewers, do reach out to us for one of those sessions. Perhaps the resume will then become a focus, but there's much more that we can discuss. And we will share with you some of the future webinars and masterclasses that we're hosting at Fortuna. Catherine, Cassandra, thanks for a great session.